Imagine writing a tell-all memoir about your time in government whilst you are still technically part of that government's party, knowing full well that every word you write could be used as ammunition in a leadership battle that everyone knows is coming. That is exactly what Angela Rayner is doing, and the timing could not be more perfectly calculated to terrify Keir Starmer. The former Deputy Prime Minister, who resigned over tax affairs that absolutely will feature prominently in this book, has secured a publishing deal for her autobiography, which will hit shelves in the second half of 2026. That is right around the time that Starmer, if he even survived the catastrophic local elections expected in May, will be at his most vulnerable. Publishers engaged in a bidding war for this book, which tells you everything you need to know about how explosive they expect it to be. And the betting markets? They have Rayner as the second most likely person to replace Starmer as Prime Minister and Labour leader, trailing only behind Health Secretary Wes Streeting. This is not just a memoir. Folks, this is a manifesto, a campaign launch, and possibly a political obituary for Sir Keir, all wrapped up in one convenient hardcover package. Quick favor, if you are enjoying this, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Over 94% of you have not subscribed yet. It is absolutely free, takes 2 seconds, and means a world to us. Cheers if you did. Now back to the show. So let us talk about what makes this memoir so potentially devastating for Keir Starmer and so perfectly timed for Angela Rayner's apparent ambitions. First, the basics. Rayner has secured a deal with a Bodley Head, a division of Penguin, one of the biggest publishers in the world. This is not some vanity project with a small independent press. This is a major publication that will be marketed, promoted, and distributed across the country and beyond. The book was subject to a bidding war among several publishers, which means multiple companies thought this was valuable enough to compete for. When publishers fight over a political memoir, it is because they believe it will sell, and political memoirs sell when they contain juicy revelations, controversial opinions, or provide ammunition for ongoing political battles. The book will cover Rayner's entire journey, from her impoverished childhood and difficult upbringing through to her resignation from the second-in-command position in Starmer's government. Now, the early life stuff will undoubtedly be compelling. Rayner has never hidden her background. She left school at 16 without qualifications, became a teenage mother, worked as a care worker, and clawed her way up through trade union activism into politics. It is a genuinely remarkable story that contrasts sharply with the backgrounds of many politicians who went to Oxford or Cambridge, worked in think tanks or law firms, and glided into safe seats. Rayner represents something different, and that authenticity is a huge part of her appeal. But whilst her origin story will inspire and her early political career will provide context, the real selling point of this book, the reason publishers were fighting over it, is what she will say about her time in government and her departure from it. Rayner resigned over her tax affairs, specifically questions about her property dealings and whether she properly declared capital gains tax. The details are complicated, involving which house was her primary residence and when, but the political impact was simple. She had to resign. The scandal would not go away, the questions kept coming, and eventually she fell on her sword. Now, here is where it gets interesting. When politicians resign in disgrace, they usually keep quiet for a while, rebuild their reputation slowly, and maybe write a memoir years later when emotions have cooled and everyone has moved on. But Rayner is publishing her book in the second half of 2026, barely a year after her resignation, and right in the middle of what is shaping up to be a massive political battle over Labour's direction and Starmer's leadership. That timing is not accidental. That is strategic. A friend of Rayner told The Guardian that there has been huge interest from publishers, and this will not be your standard politician's memoir. It will be authentically Angela and in her own voice. Let us decode that. Authentically Angela means blunt, direct, and willing to say things that would make party managers wince. In her own voice means not sanitized by spin doctors or carefully crafted to avoid offending anyone. This is going to be a book that tells uncomfortable truths, settles scores, and positions Rayner as a truth teller who was constrained by the political machinery around her but is now free to speak honestly. Alice Skinner, editorial director at Rayner's Publishers, was even more explicit about what to expect. She said the book will be unvarnished and upfront, that Rayner's authenticity will shine through, and it will present an empowering vision for a fairer, kinder society that will enable everyone to flourish. That last bit is crucial. This is not just a memoir. It is a political vision statement. Rayner is not just telling her story. She is laying out what she believes Labour should stand for and, by implication, how that differs from what Starmer is actually doing. It will spark change, one read at a time, Skinner added, which is basically saying this book is meant to inspire political action and shift opinions. Now, despite the circumstances of her departure from high office, Rayner remains both popular and influential among Labour MPs and members. This is absolutely critical to understanding why Starmer should be terrified. If Rayner had resigned and then become a pariah within the party, if MPs and members had turned on her and she had lost her power base, then this memoir would just be the bitter ramblings of a failed politician with an axe to grind. But that is not what happened. She is still popular. She is still influential. Labour members, particularly the more left-leaning grassroots, love her. Many MPs respect her and see her as someone who understands working-class voters in a way that Starmer, the former human rights lawyer and director of public prosecutions, simply does not. And the betting markets reflect this ongoing support and a potential to replace Starmer. Oddschecker published odds this morning showing Rayner as the second most likely person to become Prime Minister if Starmer is toppled, trailing only behind Wes Streeting. Now, betting markets are not always accurate predictors of political outcomes, but they reflect where money is being placed, which in turn reflects what informed observers think might happen. The fact that despite her tax scandal and resignation, Rayner is still seen as the second most likely replacement for Starmer tells you everything about how weak his position is and how strong Hayes remains. Wes Streeting being first favorite is interesting in itself. He is a Health Secretary, young, media-savvy, and willing to pick fights with vested interests like the British Medical Association. He represents a more centrist, Blair-style approach to Labour politics. Rayner, by contrast, represents the more authentically working-class, slightly more left-wing, definitely more rough-edged version of Labour politics. The battle between these two visions, if and when Starmer falls, will be fascinating to watch. But back to the memoir and its timing. Yesterday, it emerged that Starmer is already strategizing to avoid a leadership challenge after what is widely expected to be a disastrous showing in the May elections. His plan, as we have discussed before, is to schedule the King's speech for May 12th or 13th, just a week after voters go to the polls. The theory is that having the King unveil the government's agenda so soon after potentially terrible election results will make it much harder for MPs to launch a leadership challenge because it would look chaotic and disrespectful to create political turmoil right around a major state occasion. A government source told the BBC it will be much harder for somebody to challenge a Prime Minister and say we need to go in a different direction when the King is about to come to Parliament to announce what we are doing for the next year. This is political game playing at its finest, using constitutional traditions as a shield against internal party revolt. But here's the thing. If the May elections are as catastrophic as expected, if Labour loses hundreds of councillors, if Reform UK makes massive gains, if the narrative becomes one of total rejection by voters, then even the King's speech might not provide enough cover. And this is where Rayner's memoir becomes a potential weapon of mass political destruction. Imagine this scenario. May elections happen. Labour gets demolished. Starmer survived the immediate aftermath thanks to the King's speech timing, but discontent continues to simmer. Then, in the second half of 2026, Rayner's book comes out. It details her version of what went wrong, why she really resigned, what she thinks Labour should stand for, and possibly includes some unflattering assessments of Starmer's leadership style and political judgment. Suddenly, the leadership question that was temporarily suppressed by the King's speech timing roars back to life, except now it has a detailed manifesto and personal narrative attached to it in the form of Rayner's best-selling memoir. The book becomes a rallying point. MPs who are dissatisfied with Starmer but were waiting for the right moment to move against him suddenly have a fully articulated alternative vision to point to. Rayner does not even need to explicitly say she wants to be leader. The book can just paint a picture of what Labour could be, contrast it with what it currently is under Starmer, and let readers, including Labour MPs and members, draw their own conclusions. It is plausible deniability combined with maximum political impact. Many Labour MPs have reportedly earmarked the local elections as Starmer's final chance to prove he can turn things around. And should he fail, they will move to replace him. This is not speculation or rumor. This is apparently the actual conversation happening in Westminster tea rooms and WhatsApp groups. MPs are waiting, watching, and preparing for the possibility that they will need to act. The May elections are the test. If Starmer passes, if somehow Labour does better than expected, or at least limits the damage, then he gets more time. But if the results are as bad as polls suggest, then his time is up. And who benefits most from Starmer falling? The people positioned as plausible replacements. Wes Streeting and Angela Rayner. Streeting will pitch himself as a safe, centrist, electable option who can win back Middle England. Rayner will pitch herself as the authentic, working-class voice who understands Labour's traditional base and can reconnect the party with the voters it has lost. Both pitches have merit, and the battle between them will define Labour's direction for years. But Rayner has something Streeting does not: a published memoir coming out at exactly the right time to make her case. Streeting will have to rely on speeches, interviews, and his record as Health Secretary. Rayner will have a book in shops, being reviewed in newspapers, discussed on television, and read by Labour members and MPs. It is a massive platform and a massive advantage in any leadership contest that might emerge. Now, Rayner is reportedly yet to decide on a title for the memoir, which is interesting in itself.